guilt results from unused life, from the unlived in us, right? So I think like that's, and I think that's like an evolutionarily like adaptive thing, right? Like that's where guilt comes from.
All right, man, let's do this. 2.5 years later, or however fucking long it is. So it's gonna be a lot of fun, man. I want to get into in the beginning one of your tweets, which I did not realize you were so active on Twitter. Number one, but I think it's going to give a good basis for today. So your recent tweet is a future built on hope or a future built on despair. The choice is yours.
Hmm.
What's got you into that type of thinking?
Um, I suppose like I've been thinking a lot more to the degree that our thoughts like influence the world, and that like we like to think that like it's like a very matter based universe where like like what you build like with Lego blocks is what you make, but like before you start building with the Lego blocks there's like an idea there, right? So I've been thinking like a lot more about like ideas, and there's a lot of doom and gloom in the world, and something I've been like very annoyed by for quite a while. uh, and like, not to say that there isn't things to be like angry about, but I think like you need to be like angry at something, but then you have to like the courage to want to make it better, and that's like what hope is. And I think like you have two options with like anger or being angry at the situation. You can choose despair or choose hope. And I think like I was saying, like how our thoughts influence the world. I think like if we can have more hope in the world, well then the future we will build will be much more beautiful. Like our future is limited by our ideas. If you can't imagine it, you won't build it. There's this like interesting theory by a philosopher called Nick Land called hyperstition. So it's like a play on the word superstition. So like superstition is like a belief about reality that is like false and doesn't really have any influence on like the world. Like, stepping on a crack isn't going to really break your mother's back, right? But then there's like a hyperstition, which is a belief that like is about the world, is not necessarily true right now, but actually can lead to that thing coming true in the future,
Mhm.
through like a positive feedback loop. So, and I think there's a lot more of these hyperstitions in the world than we think. So, yeah, I think it's really important if we want to build a beautiful future that we're thinking about it and imagining it, because without that, we won't get there.
That's interesting, man. When I think about like building stuff, I always think there's like two paths. There's like building something that you want that's like purely profit driven. So
Mm,
I don't know, like think of like a fucking tobacco company, or think of something like that that's kind of net detrimental,
mm.
or something that's more positive driven. Do you think that there's like more of an imbalance there between like a lot of things that we're creating or that we hope to create is generally kind of for the individual versus for like the greater good of like what we're doing? Because I don't necessarily think of like the fucking world when I go to create a new podcast or create something or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here, right? Okay, like first thing on the topic of founders, and like what they choose to build, right? My friend Peter O'Malley has a really interesting like theory on this. He has this theory of like head and heart founders, right? And that like your typical head founder, right, is like Jeff Bezos, in like 1997. Oh well, I saw the internet was growing at 1,300% a year, and I was working in a hedge fund, so I decided to build something on it, and then I decided to build a bookstore because they were, fucking easy to
Yeah.
ship and stuff like that. Like borderline autist kind of like level like reasoning and abstraction. And he goes then and builds like $1 trillion company, right? Then on
Yeah.
the other side, you've got like Steve Jobs, like this like hippie philosopher king dude with like taking like LSD and then wants to build like the bicycle for the mind, like, and
Yeah.
he's like the heart founder, right? And like then there's a degree which that's like the continuum, and then there's probably an argument there that like someone like Elon is like in the middle, right? So I think depending on like your personality, like that will influence what you want to do. um and so I think like that's like the first thing. I don't think though that like anybody can ever just build something for themselves. I think you need to find like the balance between, or I think like the optimal place anyway is like finding the balance between your own needs, the needs of your community, and like the needs of the world. And like on those three axes, like if you're doing something then and you're balancing those kind of three competing like sets of needs, and you're acting in service to yourself, the community, and the world, then you're like building something really good. You know, you're doing something.
Mhm.
I think that's like the optimal point. I think like the world like rewards you for that appropriately as well. Like I think you can't build something well without, right, it's harder to build something well when you're not like the ideal customer as well, you know. So there's like I think there's a few things, to that.
That's why I think a lot of kind of quick products that were built, or quick companies that were just kind of made out of nothing, is they just fizzle out, like payments
Mm,
companies, let's say, or let's say
mm,
like the amount of like trading platforms that are out there at the moment. It's not like they were actually driven from like actual any idea. It's just they looked at someone else and they're like, let's just do that. So that's why I think like a lot of those like fintech companies in the beginning, for example, just because I was a lot of experience in that area, they've just fizzled out over the years.
yeah, like um Peter Thiel has the quote, competition is for losers, right? Like if you want to do something
Mm.
genuinely novel, you need to go 0 to 1, and look to create a monopoly, right? Like find a niche. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that when you go into these like copycat industries where everyone's just like, it's like the Spider-Man meme, you know, like where the two Spider-Men are just like pointing at each other, you know, like
Yeah.
it's no wonder that they both get shot, right? Like because they're both just like focused on each other. Um, Again, like coming back to this like degree to which you're like what you're focused on influences
Mhm.
the world. Like I think if you're just like focused on the competitor, right, and you're not like obsessed with the customer, then like I think that's just going to lead you, like that's going to lead the two of you guys to just end up, yeah, clashing, and it doesn't end pretty. So but yeah, what do I know?
That is true, but at least you're thinking in the right direction. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to chat to you today,
Mm,
was because your thought process is quite unique. And the fact that you're thinking of this kind of like not necessarily new reality, or just like a different perspective on how we can like lead like a future, is very unique. So what do you
mm,
think was that main kind of shift for you? Because I guess when you're working at Zip, you're very focused on just growing Zip, and that was it.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, so I finished up with Zip in November, end of October, November. And then I took some time out to just like think about what I wanted to do next. And I wanted to like root myself in like one kind of main question to kind of like guide that process. Like um and the thing I wanted to root myself in is like something super simple, but like advancing human flourishing. I was like thinking about like, hey, what do I think is like what I want from my life? Like I want to flourish. That was like how I phrased it, and there's like a lot to that. But um then I was like, I want to do that, right? Like I want to, like, one thing I really liked about like the experience with Zip was like we were providing like an actual tangible service like that, like my mom or dad could use, like, and it was like serving a community, and it was like this like real service in a community, right? But so I wanted to do something like akin to that, that like actually moves the needle for like a group of people. So I like started like looking at this problem like from the top down, and I was like thinking like, what could you do to solve this? Not even like thinking about like a business, because I think like people get kind of caught up in like the how do you monetize this type questions sometimes, and like there's like if you solve a problem for people, like, you know, like money will come your way, right? So you just have to. I was like trying to find, like, I started with the biggest problem, and then I was like breaking it down into like, so I was like looking at like, okay, like what like technological solutions could be done there. I had a background in policy, right? So I was working in government affairs. So I was like looking at like, is there like something? Could I start like a nonprofit to do like lobbying around some policy issues? You know, like what do I
Mhm.
like? What could I do that could be scalable, that could actually move the needle? And it struck me that, like, you know, there's like this great innovation going on in like technology right now, like most evident in things like AI and biotech and things like that. And there's like really great minds there.
Yeah.
um, and similarly, like, economic prosperity in the world has gone up to a great degree in the last 100 years. So like there's serious problems there, particularly around like income inequality and like financial prospects of young people. But I didn't really see like those two areas as like massively needing like an extra pair of hands. Where, but like the area that like was worrying and concerning me the most, and what I arrived on as like what I think the bottleneck is for like this like human flourishing question, is like our culture. um like partly due to like technology, partly due to I think like this kind of like hyper rationality that we're in at the moment, and partly due to like a few other reasons. I think um our culture has like kind of like strayed away a little bit, and you like look around, look you look around the world right now, like, and you see like people are sick, systems are breaking, and like there's like this great coping going on as well. There's like people taking to drugs, to social media, to like hateful ideologies. And I think culture really is like the common denominator between the core of them. I think there's something has gone wrong there. So I decided like that's the domain I want to work in. You know, culture is like the operating system for society. It shows us what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. It's like it kind of sets the bounds within which we can work. It constrains us, but it also kind of shows us the way. It's like a necessary evil. It's this like thing we construct ourselves. So I was like, I want to work on like that domain, because I don't think there's enough people working on it. I think there's a lot of problems there, a lot of bugs in the code in the OS. And I'd previously worked in like I'd previously done some work in like media before, during college and things like that. So I was like, yeah, that's kind of that's the problem I wanted to go into and jump into.
And man, that problem is like across different demographics, different locations, different fucking economic equality. People have
Mm,
some people who have loads of money are running into these issues as well, of like loneliness, unhappiness, unfulfillment, social anxiety, isolation, just all this shit compounds. But my question for you off this is like, where's the main problem that you want to focus in on? Like, because of course, like I think this stuff has amplified over the last couple of years. Like fucking scamdemic came up, and because wipe people out, and then people had no business as a result, and now they're trying to like get back on their feet, and now there's like inflation and there's job cuts. So there's like a lot of problems there that lead. I guess like there's the effect, the cause, and then the effect. Then so the cause is like everything that I just mentioned, and then the effect then is all the isolation. So where do you focus your energy into? Because it seems to be like a big problem.
yeah, no, it is. Um, so I think there's kind of like two things there, right? Like I think there's like, okay, culture is like a big word, right? Like you just don't like just
Hmm.
like you can't like it's a massive thing, right? So I think rather than like focusing on that and kind of talking about like different aspects of culture, I think I'll just like reduce it back to the basics and like talk about like what is culture, like what is the purpose of culture, right? Like so I said, like, right, it's like an operating system for society. I think what that ultimately means, right, is that like different cultures have like what that's made up of, right? Like the subunits of culture are like values, like what do people what do people value, and and that is kind of set by three things. Like the three pillars of a culture are like what is good, what is true, what is beautiful, right? So we most cultures agree on like what is good. Like so going back to like the Greeks, like would be like what is good, that is your ethos. What is true, that is logos, and then what is beautiful is pathos, right? Like they had like these three pillars for like their culture and like describing other cultures. And uh those those are like generally like just collectively agreed on by like a culture over like civilizations, right? Like just over civilization, like over generations and generations, a civilization will like converge on something then, right? And what that serves then, like that gives them like a set of values, like those, or those reflect that culture's like set of values. And then that like that acts as like a guiding light, right? So like that's like what like good culture looks like within a company, within a community, within a society, within the world, right? Like that's what it looks like. You contrast that to today, man, people are lost, like
Yeah,
people
man.
like it's so, man, it's so hard to, like, how do we understand like what is real anymore? Do you know, like what is true, like what is, what, like, everything is like, you don't know what's real, what's fake. Like it's like you don't know who's telling you the truth, like who's lying to you. Like it's so confusing, man, to just be like around today. Like it's a weird world, right? Like people are confused, right? And I think it's because, like, it comes back to this, like we don't have like clear values, right? Um like religion, in a lot of ways, like it had a lot of, like, there's a lot of downsides to organized religion and things like that, right? But like one thing it did really well was like it gave us like these like shared values, right? But then, like, to quote Nietzsche, like, we when we killed God, right? um we lost these like value systems, right? And then nothing really kind of replaced it. And then, like, in the last 100 years, we've just had like this like acceleration, which I would describe as like the greatest trend, right? So then, like, you don't have morals, right? And we don't have like a strong kind of like culture, and then you like put like acceleration on top of that, right? Like,
Mm,
money moves faster, information moves faster, people move faster, and that's like all those three things are going exponential, right? And when you don't have like a map, right? When you don't have like a kind of like inner kind of guiding light inside you, right? And you throw down like that, you kind of throw down that acceleration, right? And then you live in a really rational world where like incentives like operate everything. So you've no, like, because you have no value system, right? Like incentives has no like correction mechanism, right? So you just follow incentives.
mm,
So when acceleration meets incentives, like the fabric of society is just like pulled in like these weird directions that don't necessarily align with our flourishing.
mm,
So you have this like confluence of like weird things that have happened that are actually kind of related. Like you don't get the acceleration without like the loss of like traditional, like, without value systems, because ultimately they both come from the Enlightenment as their root cause. So it's kind of weird, you can't like disentangle them. So now, like, we need to like, so like now we need to figure out how do we bring back like value systems and like
mhm.
give people like clear guiding lights on like how to live their lives, while also like surfing the wave of acceleration rather than like letting ourselves drown in it. So that's that's kind of like, I think, how we've arrived to where we are today.
I think as well the reward system is just completely different. Like you mentioned a great thing about incentives.
Mm,
Like from a company perspective, the incentives are absolutely trash, right? They're like, oh, like you work so hard and you do all this reviews and you'll get an extra bump of 2 or 3%. You do all this element of gamification and you get all these targets and whatnot. That model then has been taken into social media. So in social media, we favor people with most followers, we favor the people that get most likes with the most engagement. They're the higher status individuals in society. And
mm,
then similarly, then in a business sense, it's the people who have made it that we rise up to most. And like I'm saying this with no sense of superiority. My
mhm,
podcast is around founders and entrepreneurs. And
mm,
that's why I even love having this conversation because you're at the early building blocks, which I would say that
mm,
I'm in as well. But it's kind of like we don't have those values. And like Dan
mhm,
Coe, which you probably know well from Twitter, he always says that like if you don't have a plan, you'll be given a plan. And if you don't
mhm,
have a system, you'll be given a system, you don't have a job, you'll be given a job. And that's kind of like where we've led to now because there is no traditional values. And that's why people who follow the Quran really closely actually are very guided in their principles because they know that this is the set of rules that they want to abide by and it works really well for them. And then some people then who do follow Christianity like well, they do that as well. But I think there's Christianity in the Western sense is an absolute like it's just so broken. People claim that
mhm,
they are following it when they're just not, they don't even
mhm,
go to fucking church.
mhm,
So that's why like I think that gets criticized so much. But at the root there, if you don't have a plan of what you want to do, therefore it all falls down. And I think people like yourself, and maybe like myself as well, is because of having these conversations, I do kind of know where I want to go to. I do want to live
mhm,
an autonomous life. I do want to live a life of like necessarily freedom in some sense or an abundance. And
mhm,
I want to live like a fulfilling life,
mhm,
which is captivating in terms of like fitness, health, relationships, money, everything. Like have a sense of fulfillment in that aspect. But most people don't have that option. So how
mhm,
do you give someone that incentive that to bring them back to this is the core way you should look at
mhm.
life?
Well, like, to be honest, like I actually think that's easy. Like I don't think that's that hard. Like taste is universal. people know what's good for them, right? Like an information is can be viewed the same way as food, right? Like 9 times out of 10, you put down a nourishing, healthy, home cooked meal next to like a thing of McDonald's, and someone's going to pick up the nourishing, home cooked, healthy meal instead of the McDonald's. People want
Are they
what
though?
they
If
do,
you think
man.
about it
Like
though,
most
but
times
if you
out of
look at
10,
like,
like,
I agree. I agree with you. They should. I agree with you 100% that they should. But the reality is that we have like a lot of like fat, obese people. We have a lot of people who are
yeah,
too involved with social media that have screen time of 7 hours a day,
yeah,
and we have people that are that don't leave jobs that are
mm,
unfulfilling because they don't see another life. So I agree with you. That's how it should be. But if
yeah,
you looked at the scale of people, like that's a lot of feedback I get from my podcast from people is that they feel like that they have not given themselves that opportunity to go and try seek a better life. And like, like the health aspect is a good way to monitor it, man. Like I know you're
mm,
a fit dude, you run marathons and shit,
mm,
like, but
mm.
people don't do that stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm specifically talking about like the information component, but like I still do think that like I think like a lot of that like stuff that you mentioned, like bad diet and like bad habits, is actually just a cope for something more at the core that is going
Okay.
wrong there, right? Like as I said, like I see like three main problems in society right now, or three bad things that are happening. Like people are sick, systems are breaking, and like there's like this big cope going on, right? Like where people are like self medicating with like SSRIs. People are like are eating food that is like crap for them. People are spending too much time on whatever, like their screens and stuff like that. They're getting wrapped up in hateful ideologies, right? Like
Mhm.
I view that like cope, as I call it, as like a derivative of like broken systems and sick people, right? So I think like if you can get to like if someone's like, let's say, like eating badly and like like feeding, like making their body worse, that's probably like, in my opinion, more emblematic of a problem going on at the mind or soul level, right? So it's a hard thing to do, but like I think by like exposing people to like ideas that like nourish their mind, body, and soul, or like help them like improve on those dimensions themselves, or also like exposing people to ideas that help them to like help people in power to like fix systems, then you like have less of this cope going on, right? Like you have less of that going on. So I don't think it's like easy, but I do think I still hold to it that like you give people the options, and they will choose what is good for them 9 times out of 10. I think the problem to date is like that the current options for people are like kind of like not unified, like it's like I think like a lot of like the approach like fitness and stuff like that, I actually don't really like too much, because it's not like wrapped into like a holistic philosophy. It's just like kind of treating like fitness as like one domain or something like that, or like your mental health is like one domain, and I think like we need to like change it. Like it's less wellness and it's more vitality, in my head, is what people need, right? And that's like mind, body, and soul. It's like all three dimensions working together. So I think like with that type of approach, and like wrapping it up in like nicer aesthetics, I think like I have another critique of like a lot of like the kind of maybe lifestyle wellness content, is that like some of it can be like super like masculine, and then some of it's like super, like it's like not, and some of it can be like very jargon based. I think like there's a lot of simplification and like refining you can kind of do on that type of content to make it like more acceptable for people. And I think by wrapping it in like a wider philosophy of like flourishing, you can kind of like Trojan horse it in there for people who like mightn't be interested in like improving their body, but like are interested
Yeah.
in improving their mind or something like that.
And I agree with you. I think that there's people like Dan Go who do a great job to like help, like, how much followers they have, like 500,000, to say that like it's not about being like six pack lean or looking great on the beach, but it's about like being healthy for the long term. It's about
Mm,
not being in the ward as 80 years old, but being like, it's like what does he say recently? It was like, you want to be like the oldest person in the gym, not the youngest person
mm,
in the hospital. And I think that's like that's the kind of approach we should kind of take, is that like it's actually like more of like a as you mentioned, like a vitality perspective. You
Yeah.
said something there interesting about the input, so a combination of media and stuff. So correct me if I'm wrong, but by systems you mean like the current status quo, I guess. And I want to ask on that is like, what are the inputs to that? Is it, it's media? It's what did you consider?
Yeah. Um, so before I go into systems, I just want to like just close off the last point I was saying by just saying that like I don't think that like everyone will like you give everyone the option to live like a flourishing life or whatever that they'll like jump on it. But like I think the goal is to like do that for the people who want it and then kind of like make that like a culturally desirable thing
Yeah.
and then like see that like snowball, right? But like coming back to like the systems, right? Systems are broken. What does that look like? I think like okay, so like economic, like I think you can break down into a few things like economic, cultural, as I've already said, social systems, political systems, ecological systems are like obviously under like distress and things like that. So I think like they're the systems I'm viewing as like under stress or like breaking at the moment and kind of not operating as how they should.
Hmm. In terms of like, let's say like the social ones there. So we mentioned like social media. We mentioned like even like mainstream media and stuff for this. That has a big impact, definitely on the younger population. That's like, you know, literally
Mm-hmm.
fucking with their brain, and that's why
Yeah,
podcasts like this like do really well, because you know I will not edit this. I will just upload it, and that's just going to
yeah,
be it. And this is your opinion. This is my opinion. But you made a good point about like how you can't believe a lot of shit. Like social media, girls' tits and ass are photoshopped, guys' abs are photoshopped. The incentive behind what they're saying, you're saying about the fitness jargon and the detail, that's incentivized because people are like looking to sell a program or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with selling something, but it's like there is a motive behind it. And
mm-hmm.
then mainstream media, as we've seen over the last couple of years, is just a lot of it is just bullshit, especially US. I don't know like what Ireland's like anymore, but yeah. So what's your perspective on that? Like, how do we approach something like that?
Yeah. Um, I think like I'd go back to like again like just like our current value structure seems to be something in the West that's like kind of like oriented around like this kind of like it's like kind of like a secular consumer capitalism, and then it was like that for a long time, and then like in the last 20 years it's kind of like there's like two edges at the fringes that have like broken off into like woke on like one side and then kind of like this like more like right wing version of that on the other side. But there's still like the main at the core is like just this kind of like consumerist kind of like culture, right? Like, so I think they're like endemic of that. And again, I think like the reason like that has happened is because, like you said, when you don't have a system, when you don't have a plan, you'll get given one, right? So, um, I think like if you can give people like a system or like an alternative to these options, then uh, then like people will opt for them. But I just don't think that there's like there's not that like it's not that obvious to kind of find where these alternatives are currently. But I think like yeah, if you can solve the culture, I think like there's a degree which you won't solve, like so like these are two big separate problems that like I wouldn't know if they have much in common. Like the media problem, like they're just going to like run themselves into the ground if they keep like treating people with like disrespect and like assuming like that like the people are the problem or something like that. And same with
Yeah.
like social media, like you know, like social media platforms are also going to run themselves into the ground if they don't like start like addressing these problems. Like we saw what happened with like Facebook, right? Like that was like, you know, one day it was like the biggest platform in the world, and now like who the hell even uses it? Like thank God they bought Instagram. They'd be done if they, you know, if they didn't. Um, and thank God they bought WhatsApp as well. Like, um, so I think like these, like have to like think in like broader 100-year time cycles and not like in the short term. And I just think like in the long term, you know, the good does win out. But I appreciate that's not everyone's belief.
So I know you're in the kind of building space and like you're looking to kind of put a solution on this, but for an individual, is there an argument to just remove yourself from the scenario and just take like the the more like extreme example where you're cutting away like a lot of the loose ends for like, let's say, social media or media, just take like, consuming, like trying to be the opposite of consuming, whereby you're just following your own path and wanting to build something yourself that's much more driven to what you want to do.
Yeah, like I think everybody has, like, I believe in free will. Like I think everyone has the ability to like self-determine.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think absolutely like people can opt out or like choose to pick a different path. It's just not always obvious um what that is, or like if people don't have like resources at hand, and like they don't really
Yeah.
know what that looks like.
Yeah, it's more difficult. And like that's kind of probably the path I suppose I guess I'm trying to take is that,
Mm-hmm.
just not have as much external influences.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because like sometimes the only interaction I can have on a weekly basis is actually my
Mm-hmm.
podcast, because I just try to focus on doing my own shit and not
Don't you have a
taking like
girlfriend that you live with?
I do, but that's not the interaction. The external,
You don't
the
talk. You don't
external.
talk.
I mean the external interaction, which is
Okay,
interesting,
fair,
like
fair.
because like it is difficult, and that's kind of what I'm explaining is that like whatever that's going on, it's very difficult, and my biggest
Mm,
my biggest fear is letting kind of these years pass me and not doing as much as I possibly can. Not like
mm,
trying the best I can or working on things that I want to work on, so that I look back on like the last year or 2 years and be like, what the fuck was I doing? And
yeah.
I'm completely behind this. And this is why I like kind of pressing these areas, because to me, it's not evident why we do the things that we do. And I have really tried to question the things that I do recently, which is like alcohol, partying,
Mm,
all that stuff, and I've removed a lot of it because a lot of it is not what I actually want to do.
mhm,
So, and it's difficult still. It's still difficult to understand where I want to go despite
mhm.
that.
Yeah. Um, one of the best books I've ever read that I would recommend to like nearly everyone to read is The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it in 1973. Really interesting guy, right? But he was like, I think he was like a he was a psychotherapist, and he was dying, and he wrote a book on like the denial. So he kind of integrated his own experience of death with um his like study of like psychology and psychoanalysis. And there's this one quote from it which I think is just brilliant. I was rereading it again recently, and it's like, guilt results from unused life, from the unlived in
Mm,
us, right? So I think like that's, and I think that's like an evolutionarily like adaptive thing, right? Like that's where guilt comes from, right? So yeah, like absolutely, like the my favorite movie is Train Spotting, and like the opening speech in that is like, choose life, choose a job, choose a career, choose a mortgage, choose a big television, choose cars, compact as pairs. I won't go on and like recite the whole thing, even though I know it. But like, it's like choose life, and then it like contrasts it with this like completely opposite, which is like talking about doing DIY on a Saturday morning, pissing away your lass, nothing more, and then it's like, why would I choose to do any of the things, when I can just choose heroin instead, right? Now that's not the right message, right? But what it does do is like contrast, like show like the absurdity of just like a lot of like the normal stuff the lives we live, right? And I think like it does that like in a kind of like, it doesn't like talk about the opposite, which is like the opposite heroin, which is like living like a flourishing life, but it does do a good job of calling out like a lot of the things we just take for granted. And it definitely, it kind of does like a good mockery of that. Yeah, that book I think is like really good for like people to kind of get a handle on, like, I suppose, kind of confronting your mortality, and then using that as like a way to like direct your life. And it spawned a really interesting field in psychology called terror management theory, which is based on like the basis that like our fear of death is actually like at the core of like nearly everything in psychology, which is really interesting. But yeah, I think yeah, like that's my like my one of my biggest fears is like to have a boring life.
mhm.
And like, just because I think like like I'll be honest with you, man. And yeah, like I haven't said this before anywhere like publicly, but like when I was 8, the only cousin I had who was the same age as me died from like a rare form of cancer. So like when I was like really young, like
Mm.
I was confronted with like someone who was like one of like a close friend of mine and family
Fuck,
um
man.
died, like, and I was like, holy crap. Like I was like, it rocked my world. Like I could like I was like very like nihilistic, and like I was like fat as well, younger. I think like some of it stemmed from that. Like it like really rocked me in a serious way. And um I think like when something like that happens, I like went through a period then of just like nihilism, and then like I was lucky to have like parents that were like just like naturally like very like optimistic and like had good outlook on things. So like I kind of like saw that like the answer to like something really bad happening isn't like getting down in the dumps over it or whatever. It's like take it, there's another, like I said, hope like is like anger at the way things are plus courage, right? And you put those things together and you get something beautiful. Um so like I think yeah, like I think that's like to a large reason why I have my belief system. I think like when I like reflect on things, but um yeah, like for other people, like, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone because obviously it's like
Yeah,
literally the
of
worst
course.
thing that you could have. But like you can get it in other ways, like you can get it like without having to have like tragedy in your life. But it's hard, man. It's not easy. Like, and like you have to like actively cultivate it, right?
Hmm.
um like you have to, yeah, you have to work on like your like mindset and things like that, and there's things you can actively do about it. And yeah, so I think it's a combination of like working on it, but also it's like kind of making a decision to have this kind of outlook as well. And
Yeah.
sometimes you kind of have to like fake it until you make it or something like that.
True, and like man, that was a very intense scenario for you to go through at such a young age. But I feel like that a lot of people kind of like cascade through their life and don't necessarily have like something very bad that happened like this to wake them up. And
Mm,
then at some stage, then 30, 40, 50, maybe the fear of death is creeping up on them because they
mm,
know that they're not going to be around forever. Because when you're in their 20s, you literally feel like you're going to live forever. And that's when they like the ass under them then.
mhm.
So, of course, like you'd never wish that on, you wouldn't wish on even yourself again if you could
Yeah.
go back in it. But it gave you that small bit of a realization at a younger age because your perspective, as I mentioned earlier, like is very unique. As another Cork dude, like
Yeah.
there's not many people that think like this, like the way
Mhm,
we think about things. And one of the partial reasons why I did it, I suppose, is because I was just very, very depressed in my last couple of jobs, and I felt like there was much more that I could do, and as much
mhm.
more that I could do for other people as well. And that's where I got to where I am at the moment. And to get to the next stage undergoes a lot much more difficulty, challenge, and change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. Like I think everyone everyone needs to, I think, kind of have like some kind of form of worship. Like, and I and I heard this like David Bowie quote like a few years ago, and I absolutely love it. And he was like asked like, do you believe in God? And he was like, no, I believe in like some form of energy, but I wouldn't like to put a word in it. And then he was like asked, do you worship? And he was like, yeah, I worship life. I love living.
Mm.
Um, and like that really like struck me, and I love that, and like I think about that like still, like, yeah, man, you're just so like we just need to realize like how lucky we are to just like be alive. And I don't want to be this fucking 20 something lad like pontificating on a podcast forever, but like that's like, yeah, that's that.
No, you're right, man. But that's just a big thing that I just try to push because, like, if you go back to the core of why you do anything, a lot of the times people can't explain it. They get jobs, they get relationships, they start dating their old friends as girlfriends, and they get married
Mm,
2 miles from their house. And
yeah.
like for me, there's just like a lot. I don't know. So for me, I don't know how you feel with this, but the traditional way of looking at things was just never aligned. Like I would look at something like an apple as an example, and I just be like, I just think it's different. And I always had that different perspective. So whether it's like a job or whether it's a career, or whether it's like life or whether it's
Mm,
traveling, I always just looked at things and just felt like that things shouldn't be the way it should be. And I think maybe that's why I question things, and maybe why it's more detrimental sometimes than good at some point. But you've come to that realization as well
mm,
in some aspect, and that's
yeah.
why you're fucking in San Francisco doing whatever now at this stage.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think like a part of it as well is, man, like the way the systems are set up, like there's so much opportunity out there in the world, and like a lot of like institutions like media and stuff like that just don't like publicly like talk about like how much opportunity there is in the world. And I think that's like a real crime, like that, like people are like kind of like, I think like like if you want, like there's like they're not incentivized to be getting people to go out and do mad things like be bold or whatever, because like the way
Fact.
the status quo suits a lot of people, right? Like, and um I think like we need more of that. Like we need to be reminding people more about like how much they can do and like how unbounded their potential is. I think if we can start doing that like at scale, which is like one of the things that like I really want to do with like the Hope World startup that I'm working on, like is do just that, like is to show people like the unbounded human potential there is there, and like just like encourage them to go and like pursue it. um
Mm.
and yeah, like I think like the doom and gloom and stuff like that we're like constantly given with in this like these nihilistic like kind of like anti-human like pieces of content that are being thrown out at us, and these ideas that are being thrown out at us, like they're it doesn't like, and like the like it does that, like that leads to people living like the lives they live, like, and like these like inhuman like technologies that like we're building because people aren't building things to be great. They're building them, they're not building them for moral reasons, they're building them for like rational, I want to make money reasons. Like that's like why we have like it doesn't like, it doesn't surprise me that people are like, on their young people are on their phones and like online all the time, because the world we built for them isn't beautiful. Like we're trying to make everything safe and like round off all the edges. There's no like adventure. Like kids aren't like, there's these
Yeah.
crazy pictures they've done over like they've taken like kids like three generations of like a granddad, a grandfather, like a father and then a daughter or whatever, and they've shown like the areas at which they could like freely explore. They did one of these in Dublin, and like, first like the granddad could go like 20 kilometers away from the home and wouldn't have to get permission. The father would be like 10 kilometers. And then like this generation, it's like you can just go down to the bottom of your road and that's it. Like it's like we're building this like ultra safe, like ultra like rounded edges. Like, we're treating kids like they're like stupid. Like we're not like trusting our youth, and like um and as a result, like we just have like a boring like actual physical world in like the world we're in. um and as a result, they're like, of course they're entertaining themselves all day, because like the world we're building for them is just like numb, like it's numbing. And like, yeah, like that's why people are coping in different ways. Like it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Man, I love that. I love that because that's
Mhm.
exactly like one of the reasons why I love living in Asia, because it's like the opposite. You know,
Mhm.
it's just like it's just
Rogue.
fucking yeah. It's just like some aspects of Southeast Asia are just like a bit wild. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in a good way. Like you can get on a motorbike and drive across Vietnam in 2 weeks, and
Mhm.
it's going to cost you $50. You know what I mean? And that kind of like limitless boundaries is something that I got at a young age. And I guess
Mhm.
never went back from yeah, and that's what I guess one of the reasons why I question things as well, because it's like, okay, now we operate in this box
Mhm.
for no particular reason. Like you just were given that box to
Yeah.
operate in. So yeah, and that's what I wanted to get into next, was about
Mhm.
like the actual build. So like
Mhm.
obviously like it's like a new thing for you, it's a new concept. So like what's the goal that you want to build? Like what do you actually want to achieve from like
Yeah.
a platform perspective or product
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. So the company is called Hope World, and what it is a distinctly pro-human media network and community with the goal of advancing human flourishing.
Mm.
So like the observation I kind of made was like there's like a lot of people out there who want to live good lives, and like who want society to be like fucking amazing, right? But like there's not that many people making content for like that cohort, right? In fact, like most of the content we have like is like focused like on the opposites, like how bad things are, right? Like even in technology, you have this huge cohort, like the most optimistic people in the world. They're talking about AI risk all the time, like all the time. I'm like, oh, like that's so boring. Like, like it's important, but like I said, hyperstation, what you focus on can like actually manifest itself, right? Like this like there's this good research on like on why do like people who are pulled in at the side of the road so often get like cars rear-ending them, right? It's because they've studied that like when a car is pulled over on the side of a motorway, people start looking at the car and actually start like without noticing it, they subtly drift towards it. And that's like why so many cars get like rear-ended, is because when people see the car pulled into the side of the road. So like we're doing that exact same thing in society by focusing on how bad things are. We're just discouraging people from doing anything, and we're just manifesting more problems, right? So then there's like so much other content as well. There's like how not to give a good life. Like the biggest youth media organization is like called Vice. It's literally Vice, not Virtue. Like that's like fucked up in my opinion. And then like are people focusing on it who are like, but they're like very narrow, you know. It's like solo creators just focusing on this like one form
Yeah.
of whatever, like living a good life. And then yeah, as I said, there's some people who are like just too doomy and you know, not helping people live good lives, which is most of mainstream publications. And then there's some interesting people who are doing it, but like it's too complex or it's too academic. They're talking about technology or these things like with like really like complex jargonful kind of communication. So like yeah, I want all our content to be like centered on a pro-human philosophy, right? So it's a system of axioms, like what is true, a clearly set system of values, like what is good, and a clearly defined aesthetic as well, like what is beautiful. I think that's like a big thing missing in a lot of communications, is like the aesthetic bit of it. Like the Christians have always said, like, and lots of like ancient cultures and wisdoms and stuff like that had like very clear like guidelines around like the eyes are like the window into the soul and things like that. Aesthetics are supremely important. And my criticism for like a lot of like people in technology who are thinking about the future are not focused on the aesthetics nowhere near enough. So yeah, it's like a set of ideas that like I think can guide humanity towards flourishing, which is like a state of enrichment when you're actually, you know, acting in service to yourself, your community, and your world. So like yeah, like what that looks like is like creating like online content, like short form video, magazine, podcasts on this theme around like topics like culture, society, lifestyle, and then building a community around this. So like I already started on TikTok before Christmas. So you have nearly about 10K followers there. I'm working on a documentary with a friend of mine on this as well. I've hosted a few private events, like a party in London, a few dinners in Dublin, and that sort of thing. Trying to like test this in the early phases, and hoping later this year to launch things like a magazine, a podcast, and like a formal community around this. And as well, building like a creator network. So like not just like Hope World, which is our brand, but like another network of creators that are like vibe aligned and on the same thing. I think like solo content creation is at its peak. We're moving beyond that. I think like you see, you know, Chris Dixon, a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, has a great piece on unbundling and rebundling, and he says like money's only ever made in industries that are either rebundling or unbundling at one time, right? So like in content, for example, you have like over the last 10 years, you've had things like you used to have the New York Times, and then Substack came along, and now it's like all these solo Substack writers going out by themselves. Like you used to have TV channels, then you had YouTube, and now it's like Mr. Beast, right? And like Marquise Brownlee and things like that, and people like him. You know, politics used to be about the Republican Party, now it's about Trump, you know, and Democrats about Biden. You know, it's like we have like this very like technology has this effect of like uplifting the individual, and kind of bringing this variance to the system. And yeah, so I think solo creation is at its peak. So I think that's why networks are like really interesting. So like networks of like solo creators, but they're sharing expertise, they're sharing resources, they're sharing revenue, they're sharing financing, they're cross-pollinating audiences. And then together they can collaborate on community events that they wouldn't be able to do solo. They're launching products with each other that they wouldn't have the capacity to launch as like a solo creator. And we're looking at doing a really cool one with the network later this summer. And yeah, they can negotiate advertising deals as a cooperative, as a unit, and fundamentally just drive meaningful change more as like a unit, than as a solo individual. So that's kind of what the whole stack of the platform is going to look like.
There's a lot in that, of course, but I think just on the
Mm-hmm.
creator piece, like I think that's actually very interesting because obviously from someone who's building like a podcast and who has been building a podcast for a long time and who builds other podcasts and shit, like there's always a gap, I think, between what's good with content being created, so whether it's helping individuals or helping people or helping society or whatever, and then all the other stuff. So
Mhm.
like Twitter, for instance, there's people like yourself, they have other creators that are doing like good shit, but then there's also the divisive stuff. So if you can kind of like get rid of that, same with like YouTube, you've all like bullshit content and you've also
Mhm.
ones that are helpful. So if you can aggregate that together and pull these people together into like a platform, I think that's net beneficial. And I think
Yeah.
that's what creating your own world kind of is. So like I only follow people that educate, inform me, or entertain me to some degree. Not bullshit stuff though. And by moving that together allows me to connect with other people. So my friends are podcasters, other friends or other creators or writers or whatever. So pulling that together are people that are on a shared mission that are actually helping, that are net positive for society.
Yeah, man. Like you see this like time and time again throughout history, like small groups of people with like an aligned mission and vision of the future can do like crazy things like that. Like you just can't do solo. And yeah, I think like these like I think like you're already starting to see it in like newsletters to a degree. There's like the Free Press, which is like a collective of like solo substackers who've gotten together to do interesting things, like Barry Weiss, Michael Schellenberger, a few other good writers. You've got like the Every Collective as well, which is like a business writing one. I think you're going to see the exact same in podcasting. I think you're going to see like cross platform ones. And I think like that's like the future of this. Like I think that's what it looks like. We're going from creativity in single player mode to multiplayer mode, playing as teams, because you can just get so much more done. And
Yeah.
there's like there's a lot of like interesting technology as well that's coming about now that's like enabling this. Like I think like a lot of like Web3 is like vaporware. It doesn't do much, but I think like one Web3 project that I'm very bullish on is the Meta Label project founded by the previous co-founder of Kickstarter, Yancey Strickler. He's developing like a programmatic framework for like sharing revenue and working on drops together as a collective. And that's like really interesting. And yeah, I just think like digital technologies like are enabling these like sharing of expertise and resources in a way that like wasn't available 5 years ago. And I think, yeah, we're going to see like a lot more of this in the media space.
Are you looking to build like a social media as well?
No, we won't be building our own just yet. It'll exist on like existing platforms. Obviously, like it'll have its own website, but it'll be utilizing all the traditional ones. But yeah, like another really, but like I do think like in the future, like in social media, you will see like communities building their own social media networks. So there's this DAO called Friends with Benefits in crypto, and they are just like a bunch of like creatives working in the crypto space, and they have like a DAO, and they launched their own social media platform about 2 weeks ago now, I think. And they like built it themselves, they financed it themselves, and like all the early reviews are people are loving it because they were previously relying on Discord, but Discord is like loud and messy and it's like hard to stay on top of things. So they just build like a replacement for that pretty much. So I think
Mhm.
like you're going to see more of that. Like another interesting, like really interesting model is like the network state model. Like you're seeing like that's like the Balaji Srinivasa and idea that like in the future you're going to have communities coming together, pooling resources and like actually crowdfunding like land and houses and stuff like that. And I think like that's going to be like more of a thing. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, like it's not like in our immediate plans, but it's definitely not something like that I'd rule out as a part of the journey. Like either of those things, like a collective, like crowdfunding actual physical locations for this community to meet and live with. I think the third space model is like super interesting. Like this idea of having a place that isn't your work, that isn't your home, that you can go and chill, like a social club. Like if you had like a values aligned community, right, that was like in its thousands, right, and you had like let's say 1,000 people somewhere like Dublin or Singapore or whatever, like there's no reason that they can't like all collectively chip in money and have like a central team that like manages it or whatever, but then they own like a stake in that like physical property that they share. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, like those kinds of things are 100% in scope, but not in the immediate plans first. The plan first is like this year find our like 1,000 true fans, people that like just vibe with this philosophy and values, and create a community there, both like in
Mhm.
person and like online, and go from there. See where it goes.
Yeah, definitely, man. And that's why like a podcast, as you mentioned, is so strong in there because you can get that broader reach, find those 1,000 true fans, and be able to
Mm-hmm.
do it really, really detailed,
Mm-hmm.
build in a combination of just an individual, yourself, whoever
Mm-hmm.
you're working with, as well as like potential people that are in the audience
Yeah,
of that 1,000, and it becomes a very, very powerful network because like as you can see, you can just go into a lot more detail than a tweet or than even a blog
yeah,
post, And I have this kind of criticism as well on podcasting that if you don't feel like you can add your personality, like you've added a lot of personality to this conversation, then just write a fucking blog post. If
yeah.
you don't want to do that, and you can do this, so that's why it's a huge avenue for you to double down on.
Yeah, man. Like I think like even though podcasts, like people were like taking the piss at people starting podcasts during like COVID or whatever. Um, like I think I'm very bullish on podcasts as a format going forward. But I think an underappreciated thing about podcasts that like people don't realize, I think it's no wonder that podcasts rose in so much in popularity during COVID, right? I don't think podcasts really are as much of an information kind of like a tool for like getting more information. I think, man, it appeals to people's sense of belonging. You feel like you're in the room having a conversation with people. So it makes complete sense to me at a time of mass loneliness in the world that you had all these podcasts popping up and demand for it because people were lonely and they wanted to
Mhm.
listen in on things, Like the reason the All In podcast is so successful is because um, people like want to be one of them. They want to be one of that gang. You feel like you're a part of their group chat and you're listening in on it. Like, like it's really tapping into people's desire to be a part of like a social scene or something like that. And um, I think that's like a part of the attraction in them. And I think like one of the big benefits of them is Dwarkesh Patel has he's a really good podcaster. He's got a podcast called the Lunar Society that I really like. And he made a comment recently that like podcasting and just like media in general acts as like an intellectual market maker, in the same that like financial markets have like market makers like SIG or whatever that like
Yeah,
kind of like upvote and downvote on like stocks or pretty much and set the market rates for them. That like it's the exact same when you're like a content creator, like you're upvoting and downvoting on ideas and you're showing like what is valuable and what is not. And there's like a real role of them in the society, especially in a society today where like AI is going to like lead to the proliferation of like content like audio, visual, text at like a rate we've never seen before. It's about to go exponential. So like the value in curating ideas on like a core vibe is going to increase massively as the exponential cost of producing content trends towards zero. The value for providing a curated set of ideas, visuals, aesthetics and things like that is going to appreciate proportionally.
yeah, 100%, man. And it's funny because like the thing about podcasting or just content in general for like anyone who wants to like produce more stuff is that if you take the bunch of people who do it and the people that stick with it, it just absolutely cliffs off, goes off the
Mm-hmm.
edge because people just give up. And same with a podcast, like you might have like 2.5 million in existence. The amount of shows that get to 7 episodes, man, is like 10%. Now when the shows that get to like 50 is like 8%.
Yeah.
So as time goes on, like real conversations about real shit like this that actually matter,
Mm-hmm.
those will really stand the test of time. And like you can't, I could be wrong in saying this, but you can't have a fucking AI bot
Mm-hmm.
creating a podcast or like actually recording it. So that's why it adds much value. So for people like
Mm-hmm.
yourself who are doing like mission driven shit, there's lots of good intersection there for
Yeah,
long
man.
term growth.
And you're a fucking great example of this, man. Like you have just been grinding for the last like 2.5 years, maybe 3 years now on this. Like, and you're killing it. Like you're absolutely killing it. It's unbelievable to see. Like you've just like while also having other stuff going on in the background and like moving around between different places, you've kept at it. And you're reaping the rewards of it. You've got like a great podcast, you're getting on class guests, they're only going to get better, the content's only going to get better. Like it's you're a shining example of this, like for people, and like you had no experience in the space beforehand, you hadn't done anything like near or like it really, and you just kind of like I assume just took like a scrappy enough mindset, just started recording and doing things. And for that, like I have so much respect as like a listener, but like everybody can respect that. Like people know, like
Mm.
your trust, you build trust, you know. And like I do think that AI will get to the position where you have AI generated podcasts. I listened to one last week with like Walt Disney. Someone auto generated like one with Walt Disney. I saw one recently where like it was Steve Jobs on the Joe Rogan. Like this is coming
Oh
down.
yeah, 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 I saw
This is
that.
coming down. Yeah, this is coming down the way. Like this is what the future of content is going to look like. There's going to be a ton of it. It's going to look really good, but still, like that's, as I said, when that's still gonna, that's going to appreciate the value of people like you who are doing like really good curated sets of speakers and stuff like that, curated topics. um because like that's hard, like that's hard to it's like creativity is going to be the hardest part for AI to automate away, because it's like a very complex thing, and I think curation is a very complicated thing to do. I think like AI will be able to help it. To be honest though, I'm not as bullish as some people are on like with like AI like gonna reach, reach like crazy AGI super intelligence in the near term as other people are. I think like every time we look at, like every time we've been like, oh, AI is around the corner, like we've been wrong, like the last 20 years and things like that. So I think like it's like you're just getting stuck into like this kind of like mind virus that like typically happens in technology. When you see like a good technology, you think it's gonna like, I think we need to like taper down our
like
expectations
Web
a little bit.
3.0.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think AI is definitely different in ways, but like
Yeah, of course.
um I think yeah, I think as well, I'm also like skeptical on like AI to the degree it can like really like beat human intelligence, in the fact that like we don't understand how intelligence works ourselves. Like, we don't know how memory works, we don't know like where our memories are stored. Like that's boggles my mind, right? Like there's so much stuff about consciousness that we don't understand. Like I don't even like, I also have the belief that like consciousness isn't even located in the brain. I think it could be like potentially like non-local to the brain and exist outside the brain, and like in a more kind of meta thing. That's another rabbit hole we can go down. But like um we I think yeah, like it's going to be insane. It's going to change the world more than any other technology we've seen, pretty probably since the mobile phone, but more than that, probably. But yeah, I'm like bullish on it, like generally, but I'm like, I think we need to taper our expectations a little bit, and retain our humanity as well as we work with it.
Yeah, it's a tool at the end of the day, and I want to say thank you for those kind
Yeah.
words as well, though, because at the end of the day, like creativity is what creates this shit, and also raw, rootless obsession. Like that's literally
Mm-hmm.
what I think is just kind of rooted in. So like if you're interested in something, like you are very interested in what you're doing, you
Mm-hmm.
are going to make it work. And like I would say that I'm still fucking year one of the Chris Williamson, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I have many more years to go. But what I would say is that I'm willing to find the new crevice of like, okay, this is
Mm-hmm.
what's working, and we test, and this is what's working, this is what's working, and we're trying to figure things out. So in the future, I could use AI, or I use AI for like writing, let's say. And Dakota Robertson, you might know from Twitter, said some really good. He was saying that at the end of the day, a writer's job now is, because we have things like Jasper and ChatGPT, is that you are the orchestrator. So if you go to a
Mm-hmm.
musician, there's an orchestrator that has his fucking hands up. He doesn't play the fucking instruments, but he's what
Yeah.
molds everything together and brings the vibe together essentially.
Yeah, man.
So in the future, you're going to need to aggregate information and then be able to distill it, and the quality will actually increase to a degree, but only at the point of when you interpret it. Because if you try to write a post or write a podcast, yeah, you can do it, but it doesn't hit the same emotive feeling as we're speaking about this now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the biggest skills of the next like 5-10 years, maybe more, is going to be curation. And I think like using AI as a tool, but ultimately like having a human in the loop. And it will be really good at like automating away the little things, like the technical things, like the repetitive tasks and things like that. But like curating and like having like a human in the loop, I think really is like where these things, I think both it's like where you get the most value from it, but also like it's the future I want to live in. Like I don't want to live in this like transhumanist upload our brains into the fucking AI servers, whatever, and like live in the cloud. That doesn't appeal to me. Like fuck the metaverse. Like I don't want that. Like like I want to live in the real world. I want to be able to tactilely touch things. I want to exist. I want to like put my feet on the grass. I don't want to do that in the metaverse. Like I just think there's like, and like that's as well like not common in technology as well. I think a lot of people like want to be like transhumanist and
Yeah,
supersede whatever humanity is, but like nah man, like being human is is what we are. Like let's not like
yeah.
run away with it. Let's like lean into how we can be better humans. Stuart Brand, he wrote the Whole Earth catalog. He's like this really fascinating guy.
Mhm.
And someone I look up to a lot. He had like a great quote in like the first Whole Earth catalog, which is like a magazine which like Steve Jobs, all these like great people in technology have referred back to the as being like an inspiration for them. He had this quote in like the first one. It's like, we are as gods now, so we may as well act like it. So like, we have these god-like powers at our fingers now. It's at this point then when you have that power, with power you need wisdom. Like those two things go in parallel with each other. So we need to, as a society, collectively grow our wisdom so that we don't blow ourselves up into nothingness. I do definitely, like a lot of people talk about like existential risk that comes with technology. Again, like I said, I don't like this over focus on it, but I do think it's important to appreciate it and just know that with that we need wisdom, like we did with like nuclear weapons. We developed them, and then we went through a Cold War, and then we like got the technologies down so that we could like manage
Yeah.
them appropriately. We set up
Mhm.
treaties and things like that. I think it's going to be the same with this. I think it's going to look the same with AI. I think you will have like Sydney, the AI bot, like had some serious problems recently. There was like crazy things like being published on Twitter and stuff like that, like crazy transcripts happening where like like it was threatening people and things like that. I think you're gonna have more of these like alignment problems come out and like be shown, but I think we'll be able to manage it, and I think it's just gonna make us so important that we just scale up our wisdom proportionally, and that's what I'm more interested in.
It's like Facebook in fucking 2006, man, 2007, whenever it launched.
Mm-hmm.
As in, at first everyone's like, "Oh yes, like we can like chat to our friends now and fucking wherever," and then they didn't realize that they were accepting all this privacy stuff. All their data was getting sent around the fucking world, and
Mm-hmm.
then 20 years later, like, oh, like backtracking. So when you see like all the kind of political stuff, and I try to stay very like out of political shit, but when you saw the political stuff with ChatGPT, where it's saying like, "Oh, this is like the review of like Biden, and this is the review of like Trump," like when
Mad.
you see those things as happening, it's like, okay, maybe I need to understand the terms and conditions or like the repercussions of what I'm doing. And I think it's funny is that like a lot of the time these platforms are being built by the people who don't want to live in society anyway. It
Mm.
was the guys who were playing fucking RuneScape all their life, and they're intellectual guys and they want to do great things, but
Yeah.
they don't really give a fuck about what's actually happening though, because they weren't
Yeah.
the guys who were trying to travel and trying to live a richer life.
Yeah.
And man, like, and there's nothing wrong with fucking playing video games, but
Yeah.
it's like stop giving us this realization to the rest of the universe.
Yeah, there's been to an extent like that which like nerds have kind of built the world like we're in, and as a former as a current and like past nerd, I think that like there is like a dialectic between like nerd and jock mentality that we need, and we can't like just be like giga brain about these things and be like super technical. We need to think like we kind of need a combination of like like in building the future we need a combination of like mercenary plus like philosopher plus like priest kind of like mentalities, and we need to fuse them together. We can't just get like and wizardry. We can't just like over index on like one kind of like
Mhm.
archetypal kind of thing. You can't just be nerdy. We have to have like these other kind of archetypes like fused into it, otherwise like we just don't build a world that is reflective of of humanity as a whole. Like that's like there needs to be real plurality in like the ideas, and like diversity of ideas, which is like the real diversity I think we need in like
Mm,
building this future. We can't just like trust it to a small group of people, which is why I think it's so important to show people that they can build this future, and that we don't just trust it to like small groups of people to build this future. It needs to be like a collective thing that we all talk about together, that like all of society should be talking about the future that we want to build. It shouldn't just be like small groups of people. Like everyone should be a part of this conversation. But by having this like doom and gloom world where like everything's crap and everything's always going to be crap, and like climate change is going to kill everyone, we've just like completely caused like so much of our society to tune out of
mm,
like what does the future look like conversation. And we're not going to get a future we don't that is really human, humane, unless everyone's a part of that conversation. So if we can get people excited again and like passionate about like the future, and like show them what it looks like, um then we can get more people wanting to like feed into that conversation and get this kind of like optimism we had in society like post World War II. Like the war was over, peace was coming back, we were building institutions for the future and things like that, we were going to the moon, right? Like
mm,
we went from like in 50 years, we went from the first plane to going on the moon, from the 20s to the 70s to the late 60s, and what have we done since 50s, right? like
mm.
like what is different in the world, other than like our phones have gotten better, and like our computing has gotten faster, like like the world of atoms hasn't changed all that much. And it's just been like software really that has innovated. So like I think if we can get everyone back like optimistic and get the culture realigned towards like thinking about like a beautiful future again, then then we really could have like a second renaissance, like a real other movement where everyone's like chiming in about it and everyone's excited about the future, and like we're using technology to augment our potential rather than just like suppress it.
Yeah, man. Not letting it control you. You know what I mean? That's at the end of
Yeah.
the day. Before we finish up, what's one thing you want to achieve this year? If you can do one thing.
Yeah, I have a friend who like every year they like pick a theme for like what they want their year to look like. So I was thinking about that a bit, like end of December, early January, and the one I arrived on was like moving the needle. Um I've been guilty in the past to just like working, but like kind of like working for working's sake, and not really like driving change, like not really moving the needle. So one thing I'm really focused on this year is like just actually like working on like things that are like high leverage,
So,
and like really like just like, yeah, executing on the things that are important and kind of like dropping things that aren't. Um and I've seen that in myself in my own life. That's like when I've gotten the most successes, like when I've just like dropped things, and like
mhm.
focused on them, and like focused on one core thing. So like that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just super dialed in on this, um and I'm just like, yeah, in like we're still like not that public about like a lot of the stuff we're doing, but like I'm working hard, getting like money and network and things like that all aligned, so that we can go build and just like really like drive this on, and do something. So yeah, that is my like theme for the year: moving the needle, like actually making like real progress. So yeah, we're what, like, it's mad, we're like 2 months into the year already now, but made some good progress so far. Hopefully more to come. But yeah, man, that's my team for the year. What about you?
Exact same, man. I think spending less time working on bullshit stuff that doesn't actually contribute towards anything meaningful. Um, Rearranging my days to work on more high leverage stuff in the early beginning of the day. So taking care of things that actually contribute towards goals earlier on, and then leaving like the rest of the day to work more things like this, like more like content driven stuff. Because I feel like in the past I do so much things, but I don't see like much change.
Hmm.
And that was the biggest kind of realization. I think like as you move towards like things like this and trying to make them like really successful, not just like like small time, but like really build them forward. You need to be able to understand what you're doing and be able to work on it. And I think the biggest shift for me, and I think the biggest shift that I want to work on this year, is making more decisions based around data. So I
Mm,
want to do things that will, by definition of the data that I've compiled over these years, contribute towards the biggest kind of the biggest
mm,
needle movers, and it's working. It's working definitely for sure.
mm.
Just a lot of patience, as always. Like I always just say, it's just brick by brick. It's just every day is like ground zero, and going a lot harder on my long term goals and a bit easier on just short term stuff, because I think
Mm.
in the past I always like maybe bite off too much I can chew in a short period of time, but just knowing that if I could stick by fucking the day to day stuff, I'll get there in the long term.
Yeah, yeah, no, like I think that's like definitely I definitely could learn from that. I think one thing I've been focusing on, like on that note, is just like making lots of decisions, just making them quickly. And like that as well, like making the big decisions quickly. I think one thing I've struggled with in the past is just like having a to-do list that just gets long and long and long, and like I'm just trying now to just like just make decisions quickly, because like when you're doing something big eventually, which is, I want to scale this up and have more going on than what it's just, being a small team at the moment. But like, yeah, you need to be making decisions, like hundreds of decisions a day, so like starting
Mm,
that way from the start, that real intensity, I think. Yeah, I think it's like kind of akin to like what you were saying about how like you have this like compounding effect over time when you're like making content. I think it's the same with like decisions. If you just can like make lots of decisions quickly and try to make them like as well, trusting your intuition is something that I've been trying to do like a lot more of,
mhm.
and like leaning into my intuition. My gut, I think, is like just like that's a skill. Like, like
Yeah.
that's a skill, which is like you just have to trial and error. You just have to like do it. Um so yeah, man, I'm sure it'll yield great things for you though.
Of course, man. I think with that as well as the fact that like whatever you said, you're like 2 or 3 months into it now. Like I always just think like, where the fuck will you be if you just keep going in 6 months, if you keep going in
Mm,
a year, or like let's say the small success you've had so far, like the small wins you've had, whatever they've been. If you're like, Jesus, I've done this after a month. Imagine what the wins are going to be like after a year. And I always think about that with
mm,
like sales and marketing and different kind of aspects too, because like I didn't really come from a sales background, but like it just comes quite natural to me, but I still
mm,
spend a lot of time like learning. But I always just think like I'm like fuck, I'm able to do all this shit,
mm,
and I only have this much experience. So if I just
mm,
keep on going, and it's interesting is like running this podcast for so many years, like I was the opposite how you're meant to do it. Like what I hear is that first you should build the business, first you should build the audience, and then you build like a podcast or you like whatever, because you show it as
nah,
evidence. That's one way. That's one way of looking at it, and
yeah,
that's how a lot of platforms were built. I don't agree with that, but I'm saying that's how a lot of platforms were built.
yeah,
Whereas
I,
in opposite, I like the aspect of like building something in public, building something like this, and then building your business around that.
yeah, no, man, like I've been thinking a lot about like the media industry, and like as I said, like I think there's like I'm thinking about like about four key trends right now in media, and I'm thinking like one, rebundling, as I said; two, AI, as I've said. Um, the other two I'm thinking about a lot is like the importance of like building a community around what you're doing, and not just like speaking to people, but also listening back to them and like getting them to talk to each other. I think is like super important. But the fourth one I'm thinking about a lot as well is like how the media industry is like the future of consumer products, and like I think, and actually just like like fundamentally the future of like selling goods and services is going to see them be media companies first. And you will see like I think the consumer packaged goods and like consumer products of the future is going to be, you see this already with Mr. Beast. Like he built the
Yeah,
audience first and the community, and then he just like overnight launched like one of the biggest like snack brands in America, and similar with like the one of the biggest like fast food chains in America. And he's going to continue to do this. So like I think that's like going to be, that's the future of like like a lot of the of media, is that they're going to build a media audience first and then build businesses around that. Because like one thing media has struggled with since its inception is like no media company, or like at least like yeah, like very few media companies in the long run are actually profitable. Like the New York Times just gets bought because it's like high status. Like Jeff Bezos bought Washington Post, like Mark Benioff, founder of Salesforce, bought Time Magazine. They just get bought for status, and because media industries have been traditionally very bad at capturing value. You know, you create value and then you capture value, and that's fundamentally like what like the business is. They've been really good at creating value, but they haven't been good at capturing it. But now it's easier than ever to launch a product because it's just so much easier. It's easier than ever to like market and create like an audience. So like naturally, and now you're going to have creators that are just like able to finally capture that value. And yeah, I think that like I would be very scared if I was one of these big CPG conglomerates at the way things are going, because I think some they're really going to struggle with that. I think you'll see in the future actually acquisitions of creators where they're going to be bought. Like this is already happening to some degree,
Yeah.
um, and like partnerships and things like that between. I think that's like the future of it. So I definitely think it's like audience first and kind of sell to them afterwards, and build that trust first, and then like sell to them later. That's why I'm like not too worried about things like monetization. Just yeah, you know, build that trust first, and then everything is kind of secondary after that. Create the value first.
I completely agree, man. And you made a great point earlier about, you said the best, or like the biggest thing for the future is curation, or like creation of the
Mm-hmm.
content. But one of the biggest aspects too is holding attention and being able to grab
Mm-hmm.
attention, and create a compelling story and let people like understand your story, and then from there then they can provide different services. So like obviously my stuff is kind of B2B, but at the same time, like a lot of people like know and trust what I do. Like a lot of kind of newsletter subscribers, they also like the products that we kind of build and stuff like this. So yeah, I just think it's an interesting space. I think it's a lot more interesting than fucking some bullshit consulting.
Yeah.
And like I just like I'm just very, as I said earlier, like disenfranchised by the kind of traditional system. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that I can make it work. I think a lot of people can make it work. I think that you can make it work. That's one reason why I don't have this conversation, because I know that you can do it,
Mm-hmm.
and not because like you've fucking 50 different background startups, because it's needed in society, and that's why a lot of my stuff works, because it's just,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, it's needed. Now I'm not the only person, there's a lot of people that are doing it, and that's why it's great, so that's the story, man.
That's it, man. That's the way the cookie crumbles.
That's it, man.